year before, when I was reading a news analysis on this, past percentage of students from two different type of schools, one thing came into my mind and I tweeted. Private schools where we are not present, that is government is not present, the pass percentage is 88%, and the government schools where we are present, the pass percentage is 22%. Does this mean that we should be banned in schools? Where we are, the pass percentage is very low. Where we aren't, it is very high. Last year, I brought one issue in the parliament, and it was about unavailability of books in public schools. We had an hours-long session, and the participation was record-breaking. Around 200 MPs took part in that debate. Every MP who was taking part in that discussion was so passionately speaking about public schools. Everyone seemed so bothered about quality in the schools, about resources, about teachers, about books, everything. In the meantime, I asked one question. I raised one question in the parliament session, and that question was directed to myself as well. And I asked that, as we were taking part in this discussion, as we are so much bothered and concerned about laws, regulations, resources in public schools, and we are so passionate, how many of us are sending our children into these public schools? Out of 590, just 2 raised hands. The question was to Speaker, the question was to Minister, the question was to all the parliamentarians. And be it Maoist, be it monarchist, be it Democrat, irrespective of any political party, we all were sending our kids to private schools where we are not present. This is just a representative case, and I think the same situation exists among the bureaucrats, among the head teachers as well. About teachers, if we ask the same question in a session of public school teachers, the reply will be the same. Having said this, let me now go to the panelist.
Good afternoon, Kathmandu. Great pleasure to be here. One father told me a story that will forever stick in my mind. He said that he had gone to complain about the education in the government school. He'd gone to the school because his daughter was not getting satisfactory education. So he'd gone there, complained to the teachers, and they phoned the police and had him arrested and thrown in jail, and it took him time to get bail to get out. You can imagine the perspective, see it from their perspective. They saw this dirty, illiterate fisherman coming to complain, and they saw him as unworthy of their school. But imagine it from this father's perspective. He is there trying to do better for his child and just getting the cold shoulder from the teachers. But the good news is, this story, there is a good side to the story, because people like that father, in general, don't have to acquiesce in the government schools. There's a revolution, a movement, if you like, taking place across the developing world. And I first discovered this for myself actually in the slums of Hyderabad in south-central India. Some 14 years ago, when I wandered into the slums and found a private school. A private school in those days charging the equivalent of about $1 per month. And then I found another and another, and I spoke to the parents and asked, why are you sending your children to these private schools when the government schools are free? In the government schools you get free lunch and free books. And one mother told me that in the government schools her children are abandoned. And that's why she was sending to the private schools. So I went to visit one of these government schools. We were announced, they knew we were coming, but even so, out of the 7 teachers that should have been there, only 2 were present. And the children, 130, were piled into a class, sitting on the floor, doing nothing, bright-eyed, eager young children, anxious to learn, anxious to greet the stranger, being abandoned by their teachers. So there's a great success story here that I found in Hyderabad. I came back from Hyderabad very fired up by what I'd seen. I was working consultancy for the International Finance Corporation in Washington, D.C. at the time. I went back to Washington, D.C., told people what I'd found, and they said, calm down, Thule. Calm down. You've seen maybe a few businessmen ripping off the poor. I thought this didn't gel with what I'd seen in the old city. And so I managed to get funding from the John Templeton Foundation to see if this phenomenon was more widespread, to see how common it was, and also to see how good these private schools were compared to the government schools.
Alliances and networks of affordable private schools, which we are doing through National Independent Schools Alliance. We have a network of around 40,000 affordable private schools in India, and CCS is hosting that, incubating that for the last 3 years. So we need more such networks which advocate for their rights and which aim at changing the policy in favor of private schools and in favor of choice in education. So thank you, sir.
In Malaysia, we have 10,000 schools, 10,083 schools. The number of private schools is very small. And this is the number of private schools. By private here, I mean schools that do not receive government help. So they are completely private. There are various different types of schools in Malaysia, and I don't want to confuse the conversation. But purely private school, 99 only. So that is 1% of the total school population. Number of students in government school is 5 million. Number of students in private school, 140,000. So when you were saying that in one particular area there are 70,000 students in private school, in Malaysia that's only half the population of students in private school. So only 3% of students go to private school. But so this is where I need to say that when it comes to privately run, privately owned, completely private school, the number is really small. There are low-cost private schools. Mainly they are in the category of Islamic religious schools. And even though they are Islamic religious schools, they are still considered as better. And many of the school operators, many of the operators of this so-called low-cost private school, they do not fall in the category of the 99 private schools that are registered with the federal government because they are registered with the state government. And some of the operators are quite creative in the way they do it because they label themselves as an Islamic religious school, but they run curriculum like the Montessori curriculum, so they offer something different. And they are still considered as better than the government school. In fact, my own daughter is going to start in one of the schools on Monday actually, so that's going to be her first day.
So happy to see you all and talk about education. I was forced, compelled to go to education sector, not with my interest, but I think it is the time and situation compelled me to go for education. I found that agriculture is an important thing, but without education or wrong education can make agriculture dead or destruct or go wrong. In 1967, I was a villager. I came to Kathmandu barefoot. I didn't have a pair of shoes, nothing, but now I'm standing on my shoes and could do something.
I've always believed that education is a fundamental right, and it's a duty of the state to make sure that each citizen gets a decent education, a quality education. But I've always questioned, does that mean government has to run the schools? I've always questioned, is education free? I have always welcomed, as a member of parliament, as a policy member, when people like Cecile comes forward and say that we can bring changes in the classroom. I've always welcomed when people like Sakar comes forward and say that we can run schools in a model where it's funded by government but run by the private sector. And I've always welcomed when organizations like somebody comes forward and say that maybe voucher system could work in the